and welcome to Ouroboros Automotive. My name is Logan, and today we're going to be learning more about the 3000 GT VR4. So, we last spoke on an overview of the 3000 GT VR4, and this is a Mitsubishi project that was done in the early 90s and came with a lot of novel concepts that most people would now think of being in hypercars. But this was in a Mitsubishi vehicle back in 91. So I wanted to touch on a few different things, and we had sat here and gone on an overview of things, and now I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into it. I got my notes here, so I might be glancing over there for a little bit, but let's get into it. So first things first is the electronic controlled suspension. And what that means is that the vehicle, the 3000 GT actually had an adjustable suspension that would read through different sensors in order to adjust the comfort of your shocks. And how it did that was multiple different ports that would limit the amount of fluid that was able to go into the shock. Because a shock is normally built so that it has a oil in the top, and while it's compressed, it'll rebound back out, and that oil gets compressed, and depending on how much oil and how much of a swing you have on that, or how much of a throw you have on that shock, it'll change the way that the vehicle feels. So a softer vehicle is going to be more for comfort, whereas a stiffer vehicle or a stiffer suspension, stiffer shocks, will actually make it so that the vehicle sticks more, but at the same time, you're going to have a lot more movement up and down with your wheels during day-to-day driving when you hit potholes or just small deviations in the road, like the dummy buttons in the center lane. So how Mitsubishi achieved this was by having multiple sensors that would control different things and relay information back to the main ECU that controlled the electronic suspension. And so the different sensors were your actual switch, which was your hand switch for going between the two modes of touring or sport. Then you had your steering wheel angular velocity sensor, which all that is a little light emitting diode and a photo sensor, so that when you turned your wheel, there were little notches that would block out the LED, and the photo sensor would read how quickly it would be able to sense the light. Much like you have on a ABS sensor or a wheel speed sensor with the little cutouts in the teeth, where with a magnetic sensor, whereas opposed to this, where they were using the light emitting diode and a photo sensor. And then you also had your G sensor, which actually read the amount of G-forces of either left or right, going into a turn, front or back when you were under heavy acceleration or heavy braking. And then finally, you had your wheels or your vehicle speed sensor, which was actually put into the transmission and would read what the speed of the was coming out of the transmission and how fast you were going. So what these controls allowed you to do was actually, or what these sensors allowed you to do was actually switch between different modes for touring and for sport. And then the actual ECU would then take the information from those sensors and determine how to adjust the shocks. That being that there was an anti-rolling. So if you were going into a curve and it sensed movement across the vehicle, it would stiffen the suspension so you would reduce your body roll. And so you would not feel like your vehicle was trying to step out on you or anything like that when you're going into a turn. Most of the people would understand that, like if you were hitting a patch of ice going into a turn and the rear end of your vehicle tries to start coming around, when you're racing and you're going and taking curves at a higher rate of speed, you don't want that body roll. So in order to reduce it, you would either stiffen your suspension by adding different shocks, or you could then beef it up your lower sway bar or your actual bottom sway bar in your suspension, or by adding a strut tower brace. What Mitsubishi did was just, instead of doing any of that, they made it so that the shock would actually adjust itself to allow for many different types of driving habits. There was also a high-speed response control that when a vehicle got over 81 mile an hour, even while in touring setting, it would then adjust the suspension from being soft to being medium. Because when you're at that rate of speed, you want a stiffer suspension somewhat. You're not as worried about potholes and things on the highway. Those are generally not that well seen unless you live in some of the northern states where ice and salt is a wonderful thing that destroys our roads. Then you're moving on to the next one. You had your G sensor was used for anti-diving and anti-squatting. So anti-diving means that when you were going into a turn or you were under heavy braking, when you hit the brakes, the nose of your vehicle wants to go down as gravity comes forward, as anything in motion will stay in motion until acted upon by an equal and opposite force. And so whenever you're under a heavy braking situation, you definitely feel your vehicle trying to nose forward, and that can become an issue where you're setting off too much weight going into a turn, because where your weight is and how your weight distribution is and where your body roll is and suspension roll is all play a factor when going into a curve or going into a turn, especially at a high rate of speed. Or if you were going to be backing down to a lower rate of speed, you're coming into a turn with a lot of weight on your front end and then trying to make that curve, which is already going to try to push the weight to the outside. It's a lot of variables to be trying to go into the curve with and trying to keep your vehicle stable. So the vehicle was supposed to be adapting for you and allowing it to essentially make those adjustments and keep your vehicle with weight distribution near perfect, or as perfect as it could be in those situations. It greatly reduces the amount of things that the operator or the driver need to think about while moving. And so then you would have anti-squatting is when you get on the accelerator really quickly because the guy next to you has pissed you off at the light or something like that, or you know that he's in a right turn lane and he wants to go straight, so he's going to gun it. So the anti-squatting is to make your vehicle not do that number, where it'll pull the front nose up, which again, if your rear wheels come up or if your front nose comes up, it's also going to change the weight. And when you're dealing with an all-wheel drive system like the Mitsubishi has, you want to have as much weight down on all four tires consistently to allow the power to hit the road. And so the anti-squatting and the anti-diving and the anti-rolling really all go into that factor and help keep your vehicle stable. And then the last part of their electronic controlled suspension is bad road response, which is as simple as it sounds. If you're going down through the road and you're in tour mode and you start hitting a bunch of potholes and stuff like that, and it was in medium suspension, it'll actually drop it down to being in soft suspension in order to allow for a better ride. And that's all I've got. So this is the first part, or the second part in the series for the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. Next, we're going to be talking about the four-wheel steering and the active aero. So I will see you guys back here in a couple weeks. Have a good day.